Right, yeah, what's with him?
He's still on the tree as a pear. I'm not sure.
He's
We don't
what?
know where he
He's
is.
still a pear.
He's still a
That
pear.
hasn't been picked yet.
He's a fruit that hasn't been picked yet. He's a pear.
No, that's not that word. It's pear, not pear. No, pear.
If
It's
you
from
say it
Russian.
fast enough.
It's from Russian splendor. Oh yeah.
Yeah, and I'm not sure where he is.
It's from the root of the word tiferes.
Oh,
Pe'er, pe'er. It's a Hebrew name.
Oh, okay.
Pe'er.
And
They're
pear is a
from-
very nice thing.
He's
isn't
from
it? Very nice fruit.
he's from Persia, from Iran.
Yes.
So a lot of the Yidden have like the Hebrew name, but it's
Yeah.
Hebrew rooted name.
Rabbi, can we turn this off? I
Yeah,
can't hear too much.
guys, would you mind turning off the?
No, that's fine.
I can't hear too
It's
well.
also boiling.
Yeah, the room's quite warm actually. I don't think it'll damage us. We have it off. It's
Check
off?
in a second. Yeah.
All right. So this is a shiur. This is a shiur in Sefer Tanya, Perik Gimel, on Amud 14 of the printed Sefer, about 2/3 of the way, or getting close to 2/3 of the way down the Amud. And this shiur has been given on Tuesday afternoon, or Tuesday evening, Oyer Li Kof Beis Shvat Tovshin Ein Beis. So we saw in the previous class that through these bonanas in the Moyach, in Chokhmah and Bina, first of all, he has an arousal. We saw that was a very precise word. The hisoiras of the middle of Yiras Hareim is in the brain, the fear of the elevation, the awe of Hashem in the brain. Excuse me. And then we saw there was the in the heart there was Pachad Hashem, which was dread, and then we saw that there was a following reaction of intense love for the Eibishter, which was described in terminologies referring to fire and flame. The Rish Bayesh, and then Yislahev Levi means also that his heart becomes inflamed. That's a verb. And then we saw there were different usages of nouns to also describe the type of emotional trait in the Odom, which were also very intense and extreme in their form of longing and ava and cleavage and yearning, etc., for the Eibishter, how he's Ein Seif Baruch Hu. And here we notice that we called the Eibishter not Hu is Baruch, blessed be he, or things of that nature, but we called him Ein Seif Baruch Hu, the unlimited one, or he who has no end, Baruch Hu. In other words, both these his bonasan are connected. We saw the ore in the brain, the ore of the elevation, was also connected with Ein Loi Seif, Ein Loi Tachlis, and here we see that even we call the Eibishter with the name Ein Seif. But that all indicates that the type of his bonanas is on a high level where the person appreciates that all trays and all things which we attribute to the Eibishter are unfathomable in their intimate, how do you call it, their unlimitedness and their infinity. The whole is reflection, and what we call his bonanas is centered around the unlimitedness in all possible attributes that we could attribute to the Eibishter. Therefore, we call him Ein Seif. Well, that means that it's based on a lot of study of the greatness of it. It's not just some little balabatish impression in somebody's mind where he's sitting in his room and puffing at a cigar and just thinking how great the Eibishter is. But it's based on very profound knowledge, like we saw first of all in Chokhmah and then in Bina, and the full development of all those details in Bina, and then it leads to these arousals of the emotional trays in the Nefesh HaOdam. So we saw that it can even result in a state of thirst. And the two latter psukim that the Alter Rebbe brought or brings to illustrate the type of avo that comes from this, his bonus, he used twice psukim referring to thirst. First of all, my thirst is, my soul thirsts to divinity in general, Tzoma nafshi lelikim, and then we saw Tzoma lecho nafshi, a thirst for you in your very essence, a thirst for you directly, licho, to you, meaning the thirst for the essence of the Creator himself. And we described the story about the Alter Rebbe, how that was expressed very movingly in the famous story about the Alter Rebbe, that he said, I don't want anything except you yourself. Well, that's the thirst of the soul for the Atzma Ein Sof, how he is beyond all the worlds and beyond all limitations, as we said before. But Shimoyin, and this concept, we go on now, and this concept of thirst, Shimoyin, is the Tzomo, L'chor Nafshi, is the past participle of the verb, or at least the past tense, of the verb. Shimoyin is the union of thirst as a noun. But Shimoyin, thirst, hu mi yisod ha'esh shebenefesh elokis. Well, that is in the fundament of fire in the divine soul. Ukamoish kosvu hativim, and as the natural scientists have written. V'chein hu b'etz chaim, and so it is in the great work of the Arizal, which was written by the Rabbeinu Chaim Vital, called the Eitz Chaim, or that's the great Kabbalah work in great detail, which describes all the different levels of the Oilamus and the Stalshalas Oilamus v'chulu, according to the Rizal, and also talks later about the Oilamus of the Clippers and all possible aspects of the Kabbalah. It's written over there in the Eitz Chaim, she yisod ha'esh hu balev, that the fundament of fire is dafke in the heart of a mensch. Or moker hamayim, and the shorish of what we might just call as water, or he writes here immediately after, not water in the simple sense of gushing torrents of water within him, but moker hamayim halechos, the source of water and what one might call dampness. The word leichus means dampness. Huba, mi hamoyach, from the brain. Or kameshkosu be'etz chaim, in another part of the Eitz Chaim, Sha'ar Nun, in the 50th gate. Shehu bechinas chokhmah, or that's the level of chokhmah, shenikra mayim shebenefesh elokis. Well, that's called the water of the nefesh elokis. So what we've been told is that the element of fire and the concept of lighting up and burning and what you might call the kindling of fire and of such an enthusiasm which leads to a burning thirst within the Adam, or that element is in the heart, whereas the union of dampness, which would tend to turn down a fire somewhat if it got to it, well, that is dafki in the brain. And that's dafki in the moyach ha-chokhmah, in the aspect of the brain which we called before chokhmah, and that's called mayim shebenefesh elokis. So for what point does the Alter Rebbe add that whole sentence about the fact that the Yesod ha'esh, the element of fire, is in the heart, and that the natural scientists have agreed with that? They've also written like that. And it's also written like that in the Eitz Chaim, whereas the source of the water and the dampness, well, that's dafki in the brain, also written and backed up by the Eitz Chaim. And that's, on the contrary, that's not the heart, but that is dafki the brain. And that's the inyan von mayim, which tends to indicate something damp and something which would quench inyan of fire. So we have to suggest that with this the Alter Rebbe is hinting at us that this whole ava that he described before as thirst, and what we saw was klois hanefesh, the expiry of the soul, that's be'ikar, a thing which is mitzad the heart itself. And the whole fire and the whole thing which produced in the mensch, well, that's in his heart. Meaning to say, like we saw earlier, that what the brain did here, through his resboneness, all the brain did was touch off this fire and what you might call add bellows to the fire and stirred the fire and guided it and showed it, as it were, where to go. And as we've seen earlier in the Perek, that the midas are not created by the brain powers of Chokhmah and Bina. They're only born out, or they're only shown the way how to go. So that's expressed here in a very real way, that a person in his heart, that's where his source of his fiery aspect is. Well, that's where he gets aroused and he has burning feelings and very deeply attracted feelings towards things. Well, that stuff comes from the fire of the heart. What the isbonenus of the brain did was, the isbonenus of the brain just came down and showed that where to go and, as you might say, elevated it and bellowed at it and made it become stirred up and functioning. Oh, but that's speaking inside the heart. And so therefore it produces, like the heart is as a section in the makeup of a man's fiery. That's the inner of the heart, is emotion, a particularly intense emotion, what can even reach the level of fire or expiry of the soul, of wanting to go out and leave the body for the sake of the Eibishter. However, he said, and with this we could suggest the Alter Rebbe is throwing a hint that you might have had a shaila. I don't know if the more simple people like ourselves would have had a question, but you might just have had a question. It's brought down in Likutei Torah from the Alter Rebbe, and in Pasha Bahaloischo, and also in other Sfarim, Barichas and Chassidus, that there's another type of ahava, not just, this is only one form of ahava to the Eibusha. There's another form of ahava which is called ahava kamayim, not ahava berish beyesh, but ahava kamayim. But that's a much more delicate, much more, how would you call it, brain-type love. It's also in the heart, and eventually expresses itself through the heart, but it's a much more quieter and drawn and cleaving type of ahava. It's not a restless, excited and burning, yearning for Hashem. But it's a cleavage and a quietness and a gradual, as you might call it in that regard. It's brought down in the Likutei Torah, a whole aritas about the ahava kamayim. And therefore we say in one of the piyutim on Shmini Atzeres, when we pray for rain, when we make the famous Geshem prayer, we say over there, Zocher of Nimshach Acharecha Kamoyim, that you should remember Avraham Avinu, it's referring to Avraham Avinu, that he was drawn after you like water. And it's one that Avraham Avinu's midah was ahava. And so we see from that there's an ahava which is kamoyim, and it's drawn after nimshach, just like water sort of follows and sticks to the thing that it affects. In the same way, Avraham Avinu was drawn after but very much from the brain. Avamela, so much was it from the brain, and even though it was ahava, it wasn't a fiery ahava, and that was because be'ika, that comes from an effect of the moyach ha-chokhmah, which is, on the contrary, connected with an idea similar to the idea of dampness, which is quiet, and it's a inner seeping type of activity rather than burning at something. But both of them are connected with the heart, and it depends what way it's working. In the ahava karish be'esh, all the moyach did was just stirred up the ahava and brought it out, and the real fundament and element of that fire is in the heart itself. Oh, but there's another type of ahava which comes be'ikar mitzad the moyach, and so much it stirs the heart in the way that the moyach has it's something that we learnt in over here in reference to yira, that it's a yira b'toich ha-moyach. To a certain extent, there can be also a type of ahava which is also a damp type of ahava, to use the expression. Well, that comes from the moyach be'ika, even though it expresses itself in the heart. And so therefore the Alter Rebbe adds that whole sentence that there's a inif and eish which is in the lave, and then there's a mokkeh of mayim and lekes which is from the moyach, and that also has a significance to this perek, which is talking about the av of vayira of Hashem. Otherwise, it's hard to imagine how the Alter Rebbe would add a whole sentence of that nature, which didn't really seem to be essential to the topic we were talking about. However, having said that, says the Alter Rebbe, V'shar hamidas kulam, all the remaining midas. Now these are only two midas, chesed ugvura, ahava v'yira. What ahava is the expression of a midah which is called chesed. Chesed is, how do you call it, loving kindness and things of that nature. The outward expression of that is ahavo, and yira is the expression of gvura. How do you call it? Severity. So we have chesed ugvura, ahava v'yira. Those are the two midas that we mentioned. Says the Alter Rebbe, we find there are 5 other midas. There's teferes, netzach, hoid, yesod, and malchus. Yeah. So says the Alter Rebbe, Shah Hamidas Kulon, all the remaining midas, which we haven't gone into here, Kulon, all of them, Hein Atfei Hayira V'Ha'ava V'Tel Desehem. He said, I don't need to go into all of them. Why? Because all of them are branches, branch-offs of Yira and Ava, or they are there, Tel Desehem, they are their children, literally, their birth, things that they've given birth to. In other words, that all the main midas are Ava v'Yira, Chesed u'Gvura, those are the main midas. All the other midas are like, how do you call it, branches or products of these two main midas. Now that's a very interesting statement. That caused a little bit of puzzlement on the part of the intelligent readers. We'll soon see in a minute. As has been written in another place. So, why would we say that the two main midas are only Ava v'Yira? Now stop that, otherwise I'll ask you to leave. Okay? I see you're asking for trouble. Either you get that grin off your face or you have to leave. Okay, go outside. And when you've calmed down, you come back. Now, you should realize it's a serious matter. I don't ever send people out of the classes. Get out, close the door. Okay. So that raises the question, what does it mean by Anfei Hayira V'Ava, the branches of fear and Ava, and their how do you call it, products, or their children almost. So what's the difference between a branch or a tilde? What's the difference? So it's brought down, and we could suggest that if you take a midah like Neitach, so it's brought down according to Kabbalah, the midas HaNeitach is in the same side as Chesed, and on the same side as Chochmah. If we arrange them, the midas in what's called 3 lines, Yamin, small, V'emta, then on the Yamin you have Chochmah, and then you have Chesed, and then you have Neitach. On the small you have Bina, Gevura, and you have Hoid. And in the middle you have Das, Tiferet, Yesod. So we say that Neitach is a branch, as it were, of Chesed. Now why would we say that? Because Neitach means victory. It means overcoming difficulties and literally fighting for what you want. That's called Neitach. Now the truth of the matter is that Hoid is also a little bit that way. But Hoid is in the Tada Gevura, and therefore it expresses itself in a slightly different way. But you overcome things which in yourself get in the way of you carrying out what you really want to carry out. And why do you really want to carry out? Because you love Hashem. Yeah, since you love Him, therefore you want to make sure you do things properly, you want to do things according to His will, you want to do the mitzvahs properly, you want to learn Torah with a brand and with a chayis, and with all those in Yonim, and all of a sudden comes on the Nefesh Abamiyas, and he throws onto you a laziness, and all of a sudden this, and all of a sudden that, and all of a sudden a picture in your mind that you're really terribly preoccupied in this world, and therefore you can't learn, and you've got terribly other, all sorts of good excuses. If other people only knew what you're really going through, etc., then they would have realized why you're not able to do as much as you can. So Midas HaNeitach said, oh yes, I can do it. I'm not listening to all these inner voices, but I can do it, and I'm going to do it. Well, that's called a branch of the midah of chesed. Because you love Hashem, therefore you're prepared vehemently to overcome the things that stand in your way. And that's on the tzad of chesed. On the tzad of gevura, it's hoid. So hoid is a little bit of a tricky one, because hoid is where you're prepared to fight other aspects outside yourself. You're prepared to fight factors in the world which get in your way of carrying out the ways of Hashem. And then Malchus is another inyan, Yesod is another inyan, but they're all connected one way or another with Chesed and Gevura. However, Tiferes, we could maybe say that when he uses the expression Toldoi Sehen, maybe he's referring to Tiferes. I'm just saying this by way of suggestion. Because what is Tiferes? Tiferes is a combination between Chesed and Gevura, between Yira and Ava. But it's not just a combination, it's a new midah, it's a new inyan of simcha and bittul in the splendor of Hashem, and that causes a special type of simcha in the nefesh. Well, that special type of simcha and joy and uplift that there is mitzad the unlimited greatness of Hashem, combining together Ava Vayira as a combination, well, that's a special midah of its own, which is just born out of Ava Vayira. So let's say, just like for anything to be born, you have two parents. In the same way, you have Ava Vayira, and they give birth to Tiferet. And the same way they give birth to Yesod. And the same way they give birth to Das, in a way. If I remember, on that basis, we can suggest that when he puts the word Torah Sehen, he's referring to how Ava Vayira act like parents to give forth Tiferes. And Tiferes is like a new inyan altogether. Mashiach, on their own lines, that Chesed and Netzach and Gevura and Hoid are connected together, and they're more like just branches. They're like just a branch of Chesed or a branch of Gevura. That's what we could say, or Ava Vayira. And that's what we could suggest that the Alter Rebbe is hinting, that all the other midas are all basically in the same way. In other words, that if through your hisbonenus you produced Ava, then, and it's a genuine Ava, then you probably have from that Netzach and whatever follows from that, because that will branch out automatically, well, not automatically, but it will follow in a way that it will branch out and come out of that particular, in the same with Hoid. The infant Tiferes would require an extra effort on the part of the Adam to combine Ava Vayira in a way that he will get to what's called Tiferet. And Begoli, that's what we call Rachamim, mercy. Well, that needs a lot of explanation all on its own right, and we won't go into that right here. So that's what we can suggest, that the Alter Rebbe completes the whole summing up of the emotional traits. The midas, v'shar ha-midas kulon ha'inat ve'ayira ve'ava v'tel le'sehem k'meshkosov b'mochim acher. V'hadas. Now we're moving to what you might call a key movement now, and a sort of a clinch move at the end of the towards the end of the Perek. We've mentioned in great detail Chokmah and Bina. We spoke about the appearance of the Seichel from the Koyach HaMaskil. Then we said bringing it down into Bina is the developing on the Seichel, and the ability to be misbeinen, and what that causes in the development of the Midas. What about Das? What is the function of Das? So it says the Alter Rebbe, Das is a very unusual, but nonetheless very essential power in the brain. It's not an emotion. It's a part of the koyach of the moyach. It's one of the koyachs inside the moyach, which lead to the genuine possibility that you will have genuine midos. In other words, that you will give birth to lasting and, how do you call it, influential emotional traits, how they should be according to divinity in your nefesh. And that's Das. Now we're going to see from that Das is not a new way of understanding something. It's not a new way of understanding. First of all, you have to understand in Chokhmah, and then you have to understand in Bina in detail what they can do and what the conclusions that you have to reach in Bina. Das is not a new set of information that you didn't have in Bina. Das is what you do with that information. What sort of a development in Nefesh does that information produce? Don't put your nose down if you don't mind. Sit in a normal way and listen properly. You're a good student, you can grasp the material. You just got to pay attention properly. Okay? As remember, Das is a development. It's not a new bunch of material which comes about like Bina is. Bina is the development of all the inyanim that Chokhmah had as a nakuda, as a dot. However, what is Das then? So that's what he says. Das, if it's not a new way of understanding, what is it? So he says, V'hadas hu miloshen, it's from the expression, and this is a pasuk in Bereshis, in chapter Daled, V'ha'odam yodo es chava. Now that's referring to the union between male and female, and this is referring to how Adam gave birth to Cain and Hevel, and Rashi says that was even before he was driven out of Gan Eden. That was before the Chet Eitzadas, that already he and Chava were united together in the union of male and female, and that's called, or that union is called Yodah. He knew. Adam Yodah is Chava. So from that we see that just like the union of the male and female is like a joining together of two separate entities, and in a way they become very much united together, and therefore the pasuk says in another place, "V'hoyu lebasa echad," they become like one flesh. However, he says this type of power in the brain, which is das, he said that's connected with this whole idea of the Adam uniting with his partner Chava. Well, that's called Yoda, which is the expression of the verb to know. Yoda. So that would intend to imply that the word das implies a very powerful union. So he said, Adam Yoda es Chava, v'hu loshen, and he said that carries in itself the implication in Loshen Kodesh of hiskashrus, being bound up, v'hischabros, being joined together. In other words, that das is that you become bound over and you become joined on to what you understood. And there's a special power in the brain which does that to you. And unless that happens to you, you're not going to be able to get to midas in the heart. Now, why would that be? Why do we need to? And I remember I once had a very early Talmud of mine way back in the years when, shortly after the Rebbe founded the yeshiva, it was about in Toshin Koftes or Toshin Lamed. And when I was in America in the late summer, and I made these things that I had done to me, as he came to see me, this person, and he's already a grandfather. He's already a grandfather. So that just shows how old the program is. Anyway, he used to, he loved Chassidus, and he had this very, very sharp mind, and he used to try to define for himself all the different definitional terminologies of Chassidus. And sometimes we used to learn in one of the rooms over there. When they first built this building, we moved into one of those rooms, of course, I had to learn. And he used to sit sometimes, and I could see that he was working on a terminology. He'd be sitting, he'd be thinking like this, and I'm talking away, but he would be the whole time thinking. And all of a sudden, he put up his hand and he said, "Oh, now I know what kak for kak means." So das used to interest him. He could never really work out how do you say, what's like the way of defining in a more posh type of English what das means. So all of a sudden one day I'm sitting in the class, all of a sudden he puts up his hand and he says, "Oh," he said, "Rabbi, I've already worked out what das means. I know what das is." So I said, "Yeah, what is it?" He said, "Das means involvement." Now that's a very beautiful expression. Involvement. Involvement means that you become part of what you understood. That what you understood mixes into your life and begins to talk to you and tell you how you should live. Meaning that the message becomes a real living message inside your life. That's what involvement means. Isn't it a very beautiful idea? And therefore the connection of the word yoda, of Odom, yoda is chava, the marital union being described as das, fits very well with that word involvement. It's like, you know, becoming involved one with another. You know? It's a very clever word. And remember, let's try and picture to ourselves that we're going to get involved. And we're not going to feel in our hearts unless we get emotionally involved. Now, wait a minute, emotion is tied to the heart. No, it's not. That there's a special gift which Hashem gave, that in the brain, and as one of the functioning powers of the brain, they're able to put an ability to feel and to sense, and to become involved. And you only become involved if you feel something. If you, how do you call it, and therefore there's another place in Siddur which says that das is what's called hakara, recognition. Now recognition is something that you knew before, and you knew it very well. But you might have had a time when you didn't. All of a sudden, oh, I recognize that. In other words, it's something that's part of you, and all of a sudden you become aware of it. But when you recognize it, it's a very deep inner connection between you and that, which means that even before you even knew it, you were, at some point or another, you were involved in it. And remember, that's the idea of hakora being done. And therefore, what the moyach does is that it experiences in a way that you become involved. You can't separate yourself from that matter anymore, and you become almost in the brain emotionally committed. Oh, if you're like that, then you're going to have emotion. Then the message of the brain goes over into that, because the heart is also like that. The heart is also emotion, and the heart is, it's like we said before, it's a fiery type of thing, and it wants to get involved. It wants to be, how do you call it, pushing you into it and being involved in the matter. The Eibishter had a Rahmanas on us, and he put in the brain a power to feel and to become involved in a way that passes the message of Chokhmah and Bina into the heart. And if you don't have das working, then you can be very, very clever in Chokhmah and Bina, but you'll never really be any different than what you were before. You'll just remain the same as, and therefore we see that it's brought down even in Siddur, what I'm saying now, that sometimes we see that you can understand something very well. Or but the understanding is like a makiv. How do you call it? It's there in your mind and you know all the details, but it's like something that's abstract. It doesn't really mean a great deal to you. So therefore you can even do something which is maybe not so appropriate to that way of understanding, and they don't quite get together, but nonetheless you don't feel terribly upset about doing that particular thing, because you're not really committed to that understanding. You know it, and you have it, and you appreciate the understanding, but you're not committed, you're not involved. You know? He didn't like the word commitment so much, he preferred involvement. In other words, you're not committed and involved, and therefore you don't really follow your own principles. You don't really live according to your own principles. And that's the meaning of what das is. Das is the power of the brain to tell the heart that you've got to get this guy working in a way that he will live according to what he really understands. He should really live and feel and be committed that way. And therefore, says the Alter Rebbe, das is Lashon Hiskashros. Now that would tend to hint to us that the Alter Rebbe is talking here practically. The Hiskashros is like the follow-on and the result of what I just described was das. You become bound over to it. For Hiskabos, you become connected to it. Shemakasha datoi, that he binds up his mind, meaning the power of das. Bekesher omitz v'chozach ma'id. He takes his mind and he binds it up to what he understood, to whatever it may be, to whatever point or inyan it may be, and he binds his mind over with literally a courageous knot. Kesher amitz. Now amitz means like something that's courageous is powerful. You know, it holds and doesn't give in. So it's a kesher amitz, meaning almost an obstinate knot. How would you say a very well devoted knot? You're tied over to it. Bekesher amitz v'chozok ma'id. It's a very, very look at these words. It's strong and it's ma'id. It's very, very much, very powerful. Vayitka makshavte b'choizek, and he will take his makshova. Now makshova has already moved forward into what we call the levushim. We'll see about that in the next parak. That's already a further step in your mind, more in the aspect of revelation, that you will take your mind and your thoughts and he will be literally hammer them in. Yitka. The word yitka means to jam something into a place where it fits in very tightly, and therefore you bang it in. You know, like a peg of a tent. You take a peg. I remember in the army we used to slug away at these tent pegs, because the rocks in that of the ground don't like to receive them very much unless you jam it in. Well, that's called yitka. Yitka makshavtoi, because you jam your mind into the matter, also with a tremendous strength and with a confidence, begedulas ein tzei in the greatness of the Eibush. In other words, these things that we saw before, in your ahava, in your yira, the greatness of the Eibush, how he's ein tzei, how he's absolutely unlimited. You've got to take all that now and devote yourself to it, and you never let it go. And that's what he says, Ve'eno Mashiach daitei, and he never takes his mind off. Mashiach das, Hesech hadas, an expression in the Gemara for taking your mind away from something you shouldn't have taken your mind away. You're supposed to be there with your mind at this particular time, and what you did was took your mind away. That's called Hasir das. Yeah? So he says here, in the to which he's binding himself over and committing himself, he never takes his mind off it. Eino Mashiach das, yeah? How do you call it? He's always there. Now that's more like a time element. Eino Mashiach das is more like almost like a time element. The other expressions we've used up to now, a commitment and binding yourself over and all of those in Yonah, they can be fairly, limited in time. But if we say Eino Mashiach das, well, that means that the time element becomes unreal to him, and he doesn't know anymore how long he wants to be involved in it or whatever. He's just always in it. It's always in his mind. Wherever he goes, wherever he does, he's always bound over and tied up to this matter in a way that gradually, even, as it were, if his nefesh abamish makes a huge fuss of it, since it's going on the whole time, then gradually it conquers him. And gradually that power of the moyach to feel gets through, and it seeps through, and it causes him to become involved. He becomes swept up and involved in the matter. So I remember Joe Shanley, he said, oh, involved. Yeah. I'm sorry. Ve'ino Mashiach daiti, and he doesn't take his mind off it forever. Ki af mishu hu chochem v'novin. Even somebody who is a wise man and an understander, meaning he's both chokmah and bina, begedulas ein tzei baruch hu, in the greatness of Hashem, how he's ein tzei. Hine im lui yikasha datei, if he will not bind up his mind, v'yitka machshavte, and he will jam his thoughts, b'choizik ubasmada, hasmada means continuously, like we said, eino matziach datei, lo yoilid benafshay yira v'ava mitis. He will not be able to give birth in his soul to love and fear, genuine love and fear of the Eibusha. You've got to have this commitment and this continuous binding of yourself and upward and being involved with your mind, never taking your mind off it, and being in it, how do you call it, asmoda. You've heard the word asmoda, meaning, being very, very devoted to the matter. Then you can give birth to genuine midas. Now that would tend to imply that there might be other midas which are not genuine. So I'm not going to leave the unpleasant stuff for another class, but that's what we're going to do. And we'll deal with the not real midas, the ones that are not real, we'll deal with in another class, but not that we're leaving a bad thing for the start of another class. It just happens that that's how Hashem brought it today, and we're pausing there. But we've got on to the real key of the whole parak in a way, but that's this Inyan Fandas. And if I once knew a chassid here in Kwachabad, he said, could be he's still alive, but a very chassidish yid, and we were once talking, and he said that he's come to the conclusion that the ikar of all chassidus is das. The whole key word and the whole key concept of chassidus is das. I remember him saying that. And he actually wrote a whole little booklet, a whole kuntus. I don't think he ever printed it, but I saw it all about Darth. Oh, it's written. There's a lot about Darth in other places and stuff. Anyway, have a good day, gentlemen, and enjoy your supper, and carry on the evening with Darth, involvement, discussion. Yeah.